Hi, Trisha Reed here, consciouslypresent.com, trauma-informed recovery coach, metabolic recovery coach, detoxification specialist, energy healing practitioner, and author. In my recent videos, I've talked a bit about parasitic entities, imposter beings, mind control, and in this video, I'm going to go into some detail about what you can do about it by sharing what I do myself to deal with the onslaught waged against us, and that is to strengthen myself. I'm going to share a few ways in which I do that. First, I'm going to sum up the root issue going on with this earth realm, with this construct that we're in, and how we become susceptible to the parasitic entities in the first place. I actually unconsciously came to this when I was just a child. I was 11 years old, and we had a writing assignment for school to write a short story. My story was entitled A Computer Disaster. I wrote about a little girl and her younger brother whose parents had just bought their first home computer. The year I wrote this was early 1984. People didn't have home computers yet, at least nobody I knew. But in my story, the family just got their first home computer, and the little girl and her brother were learning how to use it the evening they got it, playing with the only thing they could do on the computer at that time, which was to input some very basic programming commands. The little girl and her brother were very excited about it, and they were having fun. But then it was time for bed. They each went to their rooms and went to sleep, but they were suddenly awakened by the sounds of chaos happening in the living room. They each jumped up out of bed and ran out of their rooms to discover that the computer had come to life. It had become sentient, and it was very hungry, and it was eating everything in sight. It saw the children and began to chase them down in order to eat them too. I have to mention again, this was in early 1984, and I had never been exposed to notions of artificial intelligence or sentient computers. As the story continues, the children battled the computer. They cried out for their parents to come help, but the parents remained asleep. The children were on their own, battling the computer that was ravaging everything in sight and trying to eat them too. The little girl and her brother battled all night, but finally they triumphed over the computer. They won. Exhausted, they each went back to their rooms and went back to sleep. In the morning, when they finally woke up, they each came out of their rooms as their parents called them to breakfast, and they noticed that everything looked back to normal, as if nothing at all had happened in the night. Confused, they looked at each other and realized it had all been a dream. But it was a dream that they had shared. The next year, we had another writing assignment for school, and that time the assignment was to write an essay on what we thought was the worst handicap a person could have. I thought about it, and I went home and wrote my essay. The day the assignment was due to be handed in, I asked my classmates what they had written about. And they had written about some handicaps I hadn't even thought of. Things like hemophilia, blindness, loss of limbs, and cancer. I began to feel a little bit nervous, wondering if maybe I had really messed up the assignment. Because the handicap I had chosen to write about, what I thought the worst handicap was that a person could have, was not to believe in themselves. Nervously, I handed in my essay. I was rather surprised when we got our graded papers back because my paper was the only one that received an A, and it was an A plus at that. No one else in the class received an A despite all their awesome essays, subjects, handicaps. Later in life, after going through a few major spiritual awakening events, I remembered these school writing assignments, and I wondered, where did those come from? How did I pull that computer story out of my head? Where did I pull that out of? And the essay on the worst handicap, where had I possibly come up with that? I had not been raised by parents who believed in such notions as believing in yourself, rather the opposite. I'd been raised in a very disempowering, shame-based, fear-based religion in which we were programmed to give our power away, not to empower ourselves. You were supposed to believe in God, not yourself. So where could I have possibly come up with these ideas as a child? Eventually, I reached the conclusion that this must have been information that I brought into this realm with me. Very important information that was meant to guide me throughout my life, specifically to remember for this time in human development. As we are being faced with all of this now, in very real and challenging ways, as certain rich and famous people state that we are on the threshold of the AI singularity that they intend to try to plug us all into. But why? Why would they build this AI singularity and try to force us all into it in the first place? This is where we come to the root cause issue of everything going on here in this realm, in this construct. It all comes down to energy. There's a war for energy that has been ongoing for a very long time. But if this universe is infinite and abundant at its core, as we're told by the New Agers and Law of Attraction folks, then why would there possibly be a war for energy? There is one universal law we've all heard about, and that is, as above, so below. As within, so without. Basically, what we see happening outside of us is the reflection of what is happening within us. In my last video, I explained a little bit about this construct that we're in, and that this construct is that of the parasitic mind. A parasitic being has no source of energy, no source of life of its own. It must drain the energy or life force of others for its own survival. But it doesn't stop at its own survival. It doesn't leave sufficient energy or life force for its host to thrive, but rather, the parasitic entity takes everything and thrives at the expense of the body that is hosting it. Let's talk a little bit about a parasitic entity called Candida albicans. It's a yeast, a fungus, but it is parasitic in its nature. When it overwhelms a human body, its goal is the eventual takeover of the human's nervous system and brain. These parasitic fungi are intelligent, and they have a hive mind, a collective consciousness that has its own agenda. It lives in the digestive tract, oral, and sinus cavities of the human bodies that it invades. It transmits thought programs and even emotions to the human that it lives in. Basically, instructions for the human host to procrastinate and eat lots of bread and refined sugars, because that's what feeds this entity. It also thrives on specific emotions. It feeds on certain of our emotions, especially resentment. The individual with a candida overgrowth tends to feel drained all the time, in couch potato mode, craving unusual amounts of specific carbohydrates, specifically the processed high-carb foods, and can't function well due to brain fog, chronic fatigue, lethargy, chronic pain, inflammation, and weight gain. Eventually, other symptoms of bodily and metabolic dysfunction appear, like insulin resistance, diabetes, maybe even cancer, MS, and other sclerosis issues, and a whole bunch of other health problems. We're conditioned into believing that the problem is our bodies. But what if that's a lie? What if we're just being intentionally poisoned by parasitic mind-controlled beings who are doing the bidding of their hive mind that controls them to exploit us, all for their energy consumption at the expense of our own? What if these bodies weren't being drained by something else? What then? These earth construct bodies require fuel, energy, to keep working. They could conceivably work well for a very long time. But if something is stealing our energy, then our bodies require more energy to work right. Not just that, but we really need to become aware of what's stealing our energy and purge it. Many people take this fight outside of themselves to battle the system, and while this is important, it's just as important to be aware of the battle going on within them and address that too. Remembering, as above, so below, as within, so without. Everything out there is a reflection of what's happening inside of us. I want to talk a little bit about some tactics that are used to condition us into weakening our bodies, and why these tactics are used against us, why they're so successful. This might upset a few people, and by no means do I want you to just believe what I say, but rather to question these things for yourself. Do some research and see what you come up with. But first, let's ask, why might this upset some people? Well, it's because those who use the tactic of food restriction to control us know that that works. Food is very triggering. They know this. So please keep this in mind as you listen to what I have to say next. So this is what I have come up with over more than 30 years of research experience, including my own life experiences, along with my own consciousness explorations and intuition. So let's talk about the diet industry for a bit. What is it to diet? Well, it's to restrict your energy intake in some way, isn't it? These earth construct bodies get their fuel, their energy, from earth construct food. Calories are measured units of energy. We're given a BS baseline of how many calories a day we need, but they don't tell us that this is just the bare minimum we need for survival. And that does not include the energy it takes to think for ourselves. Oh yeah, the brain consumes more energy than anything else in our bodies. It doesn't include the amount of fuel we need for healing, which also requires more energy. For weight loss, yes, it takes more energy to lose unwanted pounds. For activities such as exercise, movement, and just enjoying life, for going to work every day, and even the repairs that our bodies need to make at night while we're sleeping. We're kept in a semi-starvation state and don't even know it. We think we're overeating. We think that it's overeating that's making us sick and fat and unhealthy. It's not. In a semi-starved state, we start having metabolic issues because the body is not getting enough energy from foods in order for the body to do the million jobs it has to do. And add to that the microbial pathogens like candida, fungi, unfriendly bacteria, and parasites that form colonies in our bodies and protect each other in the biofilms that they make in our bodies. Inevitably, for many, if not most people, as the body doesn't care about our comfort, but rather the survival of the brain to keep us alive, many metabolic processes are downregulated, and we start experiencing hormonal imbalances as cortisol and adrenaline are secreted chronically for the purpose of catabolizing the muscles, the bone, and organ tissue so as to convert it into glycogen for the liver and muscles to store and glucose for the brain and the eyes. That is the actual real reason why we have cortisol in the first place. It's for our survival during starvation periods. Without sufficient dietary intake of protein and glucose, the body will and does take it from your own tissues through the process of catabolism. This doesn't strengthen you, it weakens you. Furthermore, as the thyroid function is downregulated, your body temperature decreases and you start accumulating fat. This is for survival. When your body temperature decreases, you become prone to the microbes, the parasites, the pathogens, candida, fungi, bad bacteria, and parasites that thrive in this lowered body temperature environment. And they overgrow and proliferate. There's a myth that says that you have to starve these candida out. But that's all that is. It's a myth. It doesn't work. Because you have to starve your own body in the process. And even if you think that restricting your carbohydrates and going on a keto or carnivore diet is going to starve them out, that is incorrect. Why? Because half the protein you eat is converted into glucose. Because glucose, sugars, are that important for your brain and your eyes to function. You ultimately still end up feeding the candida. And even if you eat nothing at all, through the process of catabolism, your cortisol is breaking down your own tissue to convert into the necessary glucose meant for your brain and eyes. But instead, it's feeding the candida. Let's talk about keto and carnivore for just a moment. These may be very effective and useful diet plans in the short term. They can be used as corrective interventions, and there's no doubt that these diets have helped many people. I even did keto and extended fasting for decades of my life. Lost 120 pounds in the process. I thought that was the way I was supposed to live my life, and it worked well until it didn't work anymore and backfired. Because I didn't know what I know now and what I'm sharing here today. I learned the hard way, you can't even spell out the word diet without the word die. What happened to me was extreme and has taken the next decade to make progress with correcting the damage that was done to my own ravaged body on account of buying into the notion that something that should have been used as a short-term corrective intervention was meant to be permanent lifestyle changes. I did severe damage to my own metabolism and even went legally and functionally blind. That's another story for another time. What I realized about the keto and carnivore movement is that it causes, at least for most people, a hypothyroid, metabolically compromised environment in which the candida, parasites, and other pathogens thrive while weakening ourselves. It raises tissue-bound estrogen as well as cortisol. and it was never meant to be a way of eating on which we thrive. It is meant to be a short-term survival mechanism to fall back on during times of famine or times between resets of this realm. Just like we're not meant to live on chronically elevated cortisol and adrenaline, they're meant for short bursts, for fight or flight situations, to save our lives. Long term, this leads to burnout. I had to ask myself, are well-intentioned doctors and people being misled by an agenda that promotes keto and carnivore as a permanent lifestyle change so they can then further exploit us in a weakened and compromised state? Okay, so what about the other end of the dietary spectrum? What about veganism and vegetarianism? Surely that must be healthy, right? Well, think again. Just as a keto or carnivore diet might be a healthy corrective intervention in the short term, the same applies to veganism and vegetarianism. The trick is that when you eliminate meat, you tend to also eliminate lots of processed and toxic foods at the same time, and you start to feel better. But what you don't realize is that many of the plant-based nutrients, especially in their raw state, can't be assimilated by human bodies. That's why we eat meat, because ruminant animals are designed to assimilate those nutrients. And when we then eat the meat, we are able to assimilate the nutrients into our own bodies. Over time, with a vegan or vegetarian diet, you end up starving your body of some very necessary nutrients. Tissue-bound estrogen rises, along with unbound copper, which goes to the brain, liver, and sex organs and wreaks havoc, because copper and zinc need to be kept in about an 8-to-1 balance, with zinc at 8 parts to 1 part copper. Most fruits and vegetables are very high in copper, but not zinc. This causes a huge estrogen to progesterone imbalance, where estrogen levels, whether serum or tissue-bound, go sky high, and there is insufficient progesterone to oppose it. The elevated estrogen levels then cause thyroid hormones to downregulate, while cortisol levels rise. Nutrient deficiencies escalate. Protein insufficiency or deficiency results. And this is a problem because protein provides the building blocks for our bones, organs, muscles, enzymes, neurotransmitters, and everything that the body needs to rebuild and repair itself. And it's not getting enough of the right kinds of protein, specifically from animals. Then it gets the signal for the adrenals to raise the cortisol for breaking down the muscle, bone, and organ tissue, your own muscle, bone, and organ tissue. You know when this happens because just like with other diets that restrict anything that your body needs, your body temperature cools off, you start gaining weight, especially around your middle. You experience edema, constipation, sluggish motility, especially in the mornings, hemorrhoids, spider veins, varicose veins, hair loss, weak fingernails, dental decay, chronic fatigue, especially worsening after exercise, and any other symptom of metabolic downregulation, while you've been tricked into believing that you're eating a healthy diet. Maybe it was for a little while, when you got rid of the toxic processed foods, but over the long term, this is not healthy, but rather just makes different imbalances that must be corrected. This doesn't strengthen you, it weakens you. How about the intermittent and longer fasting craze? Same thing. For teenagers and children, intermittent fasting actually damages the pancreas and sets them up for metabolic disorders later in life, including syndrome X, metabolic syndrome, and diabetes down the road. For older adults, yes, there are benefits for intermittent fasting and longer fasts, but what needs to be emphasized is that you run on adrenaline during these fasts, and this can become an addiction. What else needs to be emphasized about intermittent fasting is that this is restriction. If you are not feasting as well, you are restricting your body's energy and nutrients. When you're fasting, your body is tearing down and killing off the damaged cells, and this is a good thing. But just like with exercise, which tears down the muscle tissues, you have got to have rest, recovery, and refeeding to provide your body with the nutrients needed for rebuilding. If you're fasting without also feasting, you keep your body in a catabolic death state, tearing down and destroying itself without providing the fuel and nutrients needed for rebuilding and repair. Fasting without eating enough too is just glorified starvation. This too raises the estrogen levels. You might have noticed that I've mentioned in all of these diet examples how the estrogen is raised as a result. And this isn't just for women. You guys, you have estrogen too. And this happens to you just as much as it does to the ladies. But why do I keep mentioning the elevated estrogen? To answer that, I'm going to ask some questions instead. What happens when there's too much estrogen in a human, or any other mammal for that matter? Who benefits from unstoppable weight gain with weight loss resistance? Who benefits from obesity? Who benefits from brain fog, sluggishness, lethargy, inability to think clearly, inability to think for yourself? Who benefits from all the other symptoms of metabolic downregulation and dysregulation? Who benefits from all the symptoms of estrogen dominance? What condition does estrogen fuel? And it's not just the parasitic microbes in your body that benefit. As above, so below. As within, so without. Remember? What industries are there to tell you what to think, what to believe, what medication to take, what exercise to do, what supplement to take, what diet to restrict your energy further? Who and what ultimately control these industries? Just some things to ponder or research for yourself. Now I'm going to talk about all this through the trauma lens. What is trauma? Trauma is not the event or the conscious memory of what overwhelmed you. Trauma is biological overwhelm. It happens when we've experienced too much stress or chronic stress, when our body did not have sufficient resources, energy to withstand it. An event that overwhelms the body then gets coupled with the emotions, physical sensations, sounds, smells, and whatever else the body was sensing at the time of the overwhelm. This gets stuck in the brain, nervous system, and the bodily tissues. This is when it becomes a trauma. So, through the trauma recovery lens, you can begin to see just how vital it is to provide your body with the resources, the energy that your body needs. What else overwhelms the body? Toxins and microbes, especially candida, fungus, and parasites. These microbes are very intentional and systematic about it. They literally build networks in your body in an attempt to take control of your nervous system and brain to control you. They are microbial masters of mind control. Further, this has been known by some nefarious entities, and some of these pathogens, particularly yeast, candida, have been weaponized and programmed with full knowledge of how these yeast parasites work as a hive mind to control the bodies that host them and transmit their instructions. These instructions have been intentionally programmed into the yeast and fungi for weaponization. Just another little nugget there to research. So to get back to how this all fits together, trauma is about energy, having enough energy to withstand our stressors. We are in a construct or simulacrum that has no inherent energy of its own. It needs ours. This construct is artificial, while we are true and real. It cannot continue without parasitizing us. This construct is built on a consumption theme, running a program of lack and scarcity, because that is its truth. It has no source but us. Therefore, the underlying belief that runs this construct is that of inadequacy, and it all comes down to inadequate energy. This installs the belief in us, in our construct bodies, in our subconscious, the foundational belief of I'm not enough, which is coupled with the emotions of toxic shame, as well as parasitization, which includes the victim-victimizer paradigm, control and manipulation. The resource is energy, and that makes us the resource that is sought after. This is reflected inside our bodies by the parasitic microbes, including candida and other parasitic yeast and fungi, as well as what we see reflected in the world around us by those who run this reality, right down to the more intimate relationships we form with others. As you can see, it is vital to take our energy back from the illusions we've placed it into and use our energy to strengthen ourselves. This starts with kicking the parasitic microbes out of our own bodies. And this also means strengthening our bodies at the same time, not starving our bodies in a futile attempt to starve out the parasitic microbes, because that doesn't work. Starving our bodies of the nutrients we need only strengthens the parasitic invaders while weakening us. So, how do you strengthen your body? Well, it's a great idea to stop restrictive diets. I use a pro-metabolic approach, focusing on foods that raise my body temperature. Basically, I eat for heat. This means knowing how much protein my body actually needs. To figure this out, you take your weight in pounds, divide it in half, and use that many grams of protein as your baseline. For example, if you weigh 150 pounds, you would divide 150 in half and use 75 grams of protein each day as your baseline. This is if you are a healthy female and not too active. If you're a healthy guy who isn't very physically active, you'd add about 5 grams to that. So 80 grams in this example. If you're physically active, male or female, you'd add 10 grams to the 75. And if you have metabolic disorders and lots of damage to heal, then you might want to consider getting about 90 to 100 grams of protein each day. So many of us don't get anywhere near enough protein, and we don't even know it. Remember, protein provides your building blocks for your body, for your bodily repairs. It's true, you don't want to go on a high all-protein type of diet. that overloads the kidneys and produces a lot of ammonia, lactic acid, and metabolic waste that your body has to work harder to detoxify. You don't want too much protein, but you most definitely want to have enough each and every day. Think of this as your foundation. Next, you need glucose. This is hugely important because without enough glucose, your body will convert the protein you eat into glucose, which gives you less building material for your tissue and metabolic repairs. And if you're not getting enough protein as it is, then your body will catabolize your own muscle, organ, and bone tissue in order to convert it to glucose. This can cause elevated blood sugar that seems unexplainable if you are, for example, on a keto or carnivore diet, and if you've developed metabolic dysfunction with insulin resistance. I personally developed this while on a keto and fasting diet for many years, and recovery has been quite the challenge. I don't recommend it. Glucose is fuel, and there's been a lot of programming to make people actually terrified, phobic of eating glucose and sugars, the very fuel that so many people's cells are literally starving for. But due to cell membrane damage from reactive and oxidative stress, excessive polyunsaturated fatty acids or PUFAs, and inflammation, usually due to the mycotoxins and endotoxins of parasitic microbial infestation, the pathogen poop essentially, the cell membranes no longer let insulin into the cells to deliver the glucose to the cells where it needs to go. This elevates the blood sugar, which causes more damage. And then sugar gets blamed. But sugar and glucose are not the problem. They are necessary. So it's important to get enough of it each day. The amount you need depends on the metabolic damage you might be experiencing, as well as the pathogen load that you might be carrying. The heavier the microbe load, the more glucose they're stealing from you. For me, I make it a point to consume at least 100 grams per day of carbohydrates from healthy whole foods, non-GMO, raw organic sugar, root vegetables like potatoes and carrots, fruits, cooked vegetables, honey, maple syrup, even clean ice cream. People with less metabolic damage without insulin resistance can tolerate more carbohydrates, and depending on your level of health, I recommend a bare minimum of 100 grams of carbohydrates per day, and ideally around 300 grams and more, much more, if you are very physically active or an athlete. How about fats? I avoid the polyunsaturated fats, the PUFAs, such as from industrialized seed oils, the corn, soy, canola, vegetables, sunflower, safflower, cottonseed oils, etc., the like. I emphasize saturated fats, like from grass-fed organic red meats, butter, ghee, tallow, and coconut oil. I also use organic, non-hydrogenated palm oil on occasion. A little olive oil is also very good, even though it's monounsaturated. How many grams of fat each day also depends. If you're trying to get glucose into starving cells, then you'd want to keep your fat intake on the lower side, no more than 35% of your daily food intake, while focusing more on protein and carbohydrates. So your body will be in its preferred sugar burning mode. If you need to switch to fat burning mode, then you'd want to consume more fat and less carbohydrates. For more on this, research the Randall cycle to learn about how this works. Just remember, despite some of the things we're told about what is the body's preferred fuel source, fat burning was always meant to be short-term, as a survival mechanism, and not for the long haul. Despite what we've been told about how our ancestors ate, we have to remember that everything we've been told are lies for the purpose of human exploitation for our energy. I believe that we did not evolve from cave people, but rather that our ancestors came from civilizations that were highly advanced, far superior to what we live in now. I believe they did not experience lack and scarcity, that if they even did have to eat, that food was abundantly available to them. I believe that food scarcity and cave dwelling really only happened between the resets, between the great civilizations that have been hidden from us, so that we wouldn't think to question the narratives and stories that have been sold to us for our energy. I believe that our ability to survive due to our ketone production and fat burning capability saved humankind between the civilization resets, but that was not how our bodies were designed to live long term. We also want to be adequately hydrated, so it's important to get clean, pure water, again, taking your weight, dividing it in half, and drinking about that many ounces of clean, pure water each day. For more on how to eat in a pro-metabolic way, I recommend the book by Kate Deering called How to Heal Your Metabolism. So this is what I've found to be the most effective way to strengthen my own body on the physical side. But there's also more to us than these physical vehicles that carry our soul and spirit around. Strengthening yourself doesn't stop at the physical body. Healing trauma is also of vital importance. And that means learning how to feel in your bodies. Learning how to feel your emotions, regulate your nervous system, safely and harmlessly discharge the emotional energy that's been stuck and causing distortions that we inadvertently give our power to. Learning about our attachment styles, coping mechanisms, and survival strategies. Learning how to set, honor, and maintain healthy boundaries. Learning ourselves inside and out, and knowing ourselves better than the enemy does. If you'd like to learn how to do this, head over to my site, consciouslypresent.com, and consider signing up for my course. With healthy boundaries, for example, it's easier for us to kick the parasites out of our bodies. And likewise, stop inviting parasitic energy vampires into our lives. It's important to be aware of and recognize these parasitic patterns that we engage in every day without even realizing that it's not normal. What is taxation, for example, but one crazy form of parasitization that we don't even bat an eye at, or we just go along with it? So there are some excellent detox protocols out there that can help our bodies to get the candida and other pathogens out. Of course, we need to have that firm foundation of a strong, healthy body first through correct eating, such as a pro-metabolic eating plan. Then we clean house, so to speak. I like a protocol called the Cosmic Death Fungus NAC Candida Detox for getting rid of candida, other fungi, and their biofilms. I like the basic turpentine protocol and zapping for getting rid of parasites. These have worked very well for me personally, and I recommend them for most whom I work with. So let's get back to the beginning question I asked at the start of this video. After telling the stories about the strange short story and essay I wrote as a child, what does that have to do with all of this? That brings us to the question, why would they build this AI singularity and try to force us all into it in the first place? And the answer to that goes back to energy. Think of the difference between a false LED light versus a real incandescent light. The LED uses a whole lot less energy, and a new AI singularity in which our consciousness is forced into synthetic LED fake digital avatars requires a whole lot less energy than these flesh and blood and bone organic bodies we're in now. These bodies require food. The controllers don't want us to eat, but they fully intend to continue consuming us. It's our souls, our consciousness, that they are after. A new AI singularity gives them the opportunity to keep parasitizing us while making it that much more difficult for us to get out and return to our true self again, which exists both here and outside this construct. As long as they have access and control over our sleeping, comatose consciousness, they have an endless energy source. It's time to wake up now. And they are desperately trying to stop that. In my story as a little girl, however, the girl and her brother, perhaps representing the feminine and masculine working together, defeated the computer that came to life and tried to eat them. In my essay the following year, as a little girl, the worst handicap we could have was not to believe in ourselves. So the point of all this is that we must know ourselves, all parts of ourselves, the feminine, the masculine working together, in order to believe in ourselves and to believe in our true self. Let go of the lies and the illusions the parasites tell us. We win this. We defeat them. It is already done. Now we reflect a different reality, one in which we escape the jaws of the artificial parasitic entity that wants to consume us forever. It starts within. It starts by strengthening ourselves. I know I've covered a whole lot in this video, and it's going to be a bit to unpack. Thank you so much for being here, for the time you gave to listening and considering. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and share with others. Subscribe if you'd like to know when I put more videos up. And please share your thoughts and questions below too. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic day.